Welcome to this gentle exploration of the human mind. Find yourself in a comfortable position now, perhaps lying down, perhaps seated with your spine gently supported. Let your body settle. Feel the weight of yourself sinking softly into whatever surface holds you. There is nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to do just this moment. Just this journey through the landscape of psychology. Take a slow, deep breath in through your nose, hold it gently for a moment, and release it slowly through your mouth, letting any tension flow away with that exhale. Again, breathe in calm, breathe in curiosity, and breathe out any stress, any worry, any hurry. One more time, in with peaceful awareness, out with everything that no longer serves you. You may close your eyes if you wish, or let them rest in a soft, unfocused gaze. Either way is perfect. This is your journey, your time, your gentle awakening to the vast and beautiful science of psychology. Over the next 2 hours or more, we will travel together through the entire spectrum of psychological understanding, from the very foundations, the basic building blocks of how psychology began, all the way to the most advanced concepts and emerging discoveries that psychologists are exploring today. You don't need to remember every detail consciously. You don't need to take notes or work hard to understand. Instead, simply listen, simply allow. And let the information wash over you like gentle waves on a peaceful shore. Your subconscious mind is always listening, always absorbing, always integrating. Even as you drift toward sleep, even as your conscious mind wanders or rests, the deeper parts of your awareness are taking in these concepts, weaving them into your understanding of yourself and others. This is passive learning at its finest, effortless wisdom that seeps in naturally, the way rain soaks into thirsty earth. We will begin with the foundations, what psychology actually is, how it began as a science, the brilliant minds who shaped its early years, and the different schools of thought that emerged. Then we'll explore the biological basis of everything we think and feel, your brain, your neurons, your nervous system, the physical foundation of consciousness itself. From there, we'll journey through sensation and perception, how you take in the world through your senses and create meaning from it. We'll discover the mysteries of consciousness, waking, sleeping, dreaming, and altered states. We'll understand learning and memory, how you acquire new behaviors and knowledge, and how you store and retrieve your experiences. We'll examine cognition, intelligence, and language, the tools of thought itself. We'll witness human development across the entire lifespan, from conception to old age. We'll explore what motivates us, what we feel, and the patterns of personality that make each person unique. We'll look at how we interact with others in social psychology, and then turn to mental health, understanding disorders with compassion, and the therapies that help people heal. Finally, we'll venture into advanced and emerging topics, the cutting edge of psychological science. Throughout this journey, remember, you are safe, you are comfortable, and everything you need to understand will make itself clear in its own perfect time. Let go of any effort. Let go of any striving. Simply be here, breathing, listening, drifting, learning in the gentlest way possible. Let us begin. The foundations of psychology. What is psychology? Psychology, at its heart, is the scientific study of the mind and behavior. Let that definition settle in gently. Psychology is the scientific study of the mind and behavior. It seeks to understand how we think, how we feel, how we act, and why. It is both an art and a science, blending rigorous research with compassionate understanding of human experience. Think of psychology as a vast exploration, not just of behavior we can see and measure, but also of the inner world of thoughts, emotions, memories, and consciousness itself. It asks fundamental questions. Why do we do what we do? How do our brains create our experiences? What makes us similar to one another, and what makes each of us beautifully unique? Psychology is not just about problems or disorders, though that is certainly one important part. Psychology encompasses all of human experience, from the moments of greatest joy and creativity to the depths of suffering and struggle. It studies ordinary people living ordinary lives, seeking to understand the mechanisms that govern attention, learning, relationships, motivation, and growth. The word psychology comes from two Greek words, psyche, meaning soul or mind, and logos, meaning study or knowledge. The study of the soul, the study of the mind. And though ancient philosophers pondered these questions for thousands of years, psychology as a formal science is relatively young, born just over a century ago. The birth of psychology as a science. For most of human history, questions about the mind belonged to philosophy and theology. Thinkers like Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, and Locke speculated about consciousness, knowledge, and human nature, but they relied primarily on logic and introspection, not systematic scientific investigation. The transformation came in 1879 in Leipzig, Germany, when a professor named Wilhelm Wundt established the first laboratory dedicated specifically to psychological research. This is often marked as the birth of psychology as an independent scientific discipline. Wundt wanted to study the structure of conscious experience, to break down thoughts and sensations into their most basic elements, much like a chemist breaks down compounds into elements. Wundt used a method called introspection. Carefully trained observers would experience a stimulus, like a sound or an image, and then report in detail what they perceived and felt. He believed that by analyzing these reports systematically, he could map the structure of consciousness. This approach became known as structuralism. One of Wundt's students, Edward Titchener, brought structuralism to America. But even as it gained followers, other psychologists began to question whether breaking consciousness into parts really captured how the mind works in real life. Functionalism, the purpose of mind. Enter William James, an American psychologist and philosopher often called the father of American psychology. James looked at the mind differently. He asked not, "What is consciousness made of?" but rather, "What is consciousness for? What purpose does it serve? How does it help us adapt and survive?" This perspective, called functionalism, was influenced by Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. If our minds evolved, James reasoned, they must serve functions that help us navigate our environment, solve problems, and thrive. Functionalism emphasized studying mental processes in real-world contexts, not just in laboratories. James also emphasized the continuous, flowing nature of consciousness, which he called the stream of consciousness. Our thoughts don't exist as separate, static elements. They flow like a river, constantly moving, blending, changing. This insight seems obvious now, but it was revolutionary then. Psychoanalysis, the unconscious mind. While these schools were developing, an Austrian neurologist named Sigmund Freud was developing a radically different approach. Freud became fascinated with patients whose physical symptoms, paralysis, blindness, chronic pain, had no physical cause. He came to believe these were psychological in origin, and that understanding them required exploring the unconscious mind. Freud proposed that much of mental life exists below the surface of awareness, that we are driven by urges, conflicts, memories, and desires we don't consciously recognize. The unconscious, he believed, exerts powerful influence over our behavior, emotions, and even physical symptoms. Psychoanalysis, Freud's theory and therapeutic method, emphasized early childhood experiences, sexual and aggressive drives, defense mechanisms, and the interpretation of dreams as the royal road to the unconscious. Though many of Freud's specific ideas have been revised or rejected by modern psychology, his central insight that much of mental life is unconscious remains profoundly influential. Behaviorism, observable behavior. In the early 20th century, some psychologists grew frustrated with the subjective methods of introspection and the unverifiable claims about the unconscious. John Watson declared that if psychology was to be a true science, it must focus only on what can be objectively observed and measured: behavior. Watson's behaviorism rejected the study of consciousness, thoughts, and feelings as unscientific. "Give me a dozen healthy infants," Watson famously claimed, "and I'll guarantee to train any one of them to become any type of specialist I might select, regardless of his talents, penchants, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestors." This radical environmentalism emphasized learning and conditioning. Watson showed that emotional responses could be conditioned in his controversial Little Albert experiment. He conditioned a baby to fear a white rat by pairing it with loud, frightening sounds. B.F. Skinner took behaviorism further, developing the concept of operant conditioning, showing how consequences shape behavior. If a behavior is followed by a reward, it becomes more likely. If followed by punishment or no reward, it becomes less likely. Skinner believed that nearly all behavior could be understood through these principles of reinforcement. Behaviorism dominated psychology for decades, leading to practical applications in education, therapy, and behavior modification. But by focusing only on observable behavior, it ignored the mental processes that most people intuitively know are central to human experience. Humanism, the whole person. In the 1950s and 60s, psychologists like Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow reacted against both psychoanalysis and behaviorism, which they felt were too mechanistic, too focused on pathology and animal-like drives or simple conditioning. They founded humanistic psychology, emphasizing human potential, growth, free will, and the subjective experience of being human. Rogers believed that people have an inherent tendency toward self-actualization, toward becoming their fullest, most authentic selves. He developed client-centered therapy, emphasizing empathy, unconditional positive regard, and the client's own capacity for healing and growth. Maslow proposed his famous hierarchy of needs, suggesting that once basic needs for survival, safety, and belonging are met, humans naturally seek esteem and self-actualization to realize their unique potential to create, to pursue meaning. Humanistic psychology brought warmth and optimism back into the field, but it was also criticized for being unscientific, difficult to test empirically, and perhaps naively optimistic about human nature. The cognitive revolution. By the 1960s and 70s, psychology was ready for another shift. Advances in computer science, linguistics, and neuroscience sparked the cognitive revolution, a return to studying mental processes, but now with more rigorous, scientific methods. Cognitive psychologists study how we perceive, remember, think, solve problems, use language, and make decisions. They view the mind as an information processor, somewhat like a computer, though far more complex and flexible. They ask questions like, how do we encode memories? What strategies do we use to solve problems? What causes errors in judgment? Pioneers like Ulrich Neisser, George Miller, and Herbert Simon showed that mental processes could be studied scientifically through carefully designed experiments, computer models, and measurements of response time and accuracy. Cognitive psychology has become one of the dominant perspectives in modern psychology. Biological and evolutionary perspectives. Increasingly, psychologists recognize that to fully understand mind and behavior, we must understand the brain and nervous system. The biological perspective examines how neural mechanisms, neurotransmitters, hormones, and genetics influence our thoughts, emotions, and actions. Advances in brain imaging, technologies like fMRI and PET scans, allow us to watch the living brain in action, seeing which areas activate during different tasks and experiences. Neuroscience and psychology have become deeply intertwined. The evolutionary perspective, inspired by Darwin, asks how our psychological traits evolved to solve problems our ancestors faced over millions of years. Why do we fear snakes more readily than cars, even though cars are more dangerous? Why do we seek social connection so intensely? Evolutionary psychology suggests these patterns exist because they helped our ancestors survive and reproduce. Nature and nurture, an integrated view. For much of psychology's history, debates raged about nature versus nurture. Are we shaped by our genes and biology, or by our environment and experiences? Behaviorists emphasized nurture almost exclusively. Biological psychologists emphasized nature. Today, we recognize this was a false dichotomy. Modern psychology embraces an integrated view. We are shaped by both nature and nurture, constantly and inseparably. Genes influence behavior, yes, but genes are turned on or off by environmental factors. Experience changes the brain. Biology sets some boundaries, but environment determines much of what develops within those boundaries. And crucially, nature and nurture interact in complex, dynamic ways throughout life. This is the science of epigenetics, understanding how life experiences can affect which genes are expressed without changing the DNA sequence itself. It's a beautiful reminder that we are not prisoners of our biology, nor are we blank slates. We are the product of an ongoing dance between what we inherited and what we experience. Research methods, how psychologists know what they know. Psychology is a science, which means it relies on systematic methods to gather evidence and test theories. Psychologists use various research methods, each with strengths and limitations. The experimental method is considered the gold standard for establishing cause and effect. Researchers manipulate one variable, the independent variable, and measure its effect on another variable, the dependent variable, while controlling other factors. For example, to test whether a new therapy reduces anxiety, researchers might randomly assign participants to receive either the therapy or a control condition, then measure anxiety levels in both groups. Random assignment is crucial because it helps ensure groups are equivalent at the start, so any differences afterward can be attributed to the treatment. Experiments allow us to say with confidence, "This caused that." But not everything can be studied experimentally. We can't randomly assign people to smoke cigarettes for decades to study health effects. That would be unethical. So psychologists also use correlational methods, examining relationships between variables as they naturally occur. If two variables are correlated, they tend to vary together, but correlation does not prove causation. People who watch more violent TV tend to be more aggressive, but does TV violence cause aggression? Or do aggressive people prefer violent TV? Or does some third factor explain both? Experiments help answer such questions. Observational methods involve watching and recording behavior in natural or laboratory settings. Case studies provide in-depth information about a single individual or small group. Surveys and questionnaires gather data from large numbers of people. Each method offers valuable information when used appropriately. Ethics in psychological research. As psychology developed, so did awareness of ethical responsibilities. Some early studies violated principles we now hold sacred. Stanley Milgram's obedience studies, where participants were led to believe they were delivering painful electric shocks to another person, caused significant distress. Philip Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment, where college students played prisoners and guards, became so emotionally intense it was stopped early. These and other studies taught the field important lessons. Today, psychological research must be reviewed by institutional review boards, or IRBs, which ensure studies protect participants' rights, welfare, and dignity. Informed consent is required. Participants must understand what they're agreeing to and be free to withdraw at any time. Deception is allowed only when absolutely necessary and must be followed by debriefing. Risks must be minimized and justified by the study's potential benefits. Animals used in research must be treated humanely, with suffering minimized. Confidentiality must be protected. Vulnerable populations, children, prisoners, people with cognitive impairments, receive extra protections. These ethical guidelines reflect psychology's commitment not just to understanding the mind, but to respecting the dignity and welfare of every person who contributes to that understanding. Biological bases of behavior. The neuron, building block of the nervous system. To understand the mind, we must first understand the brain, and to understand the brain, we begin with its most fundamental unit, the neuron. Imagine, if you will, approximately 86 billion neurons in your brain right now, each one a tiny cell specialized for communication, each one connecting to thousands of others, forming a network of staggering complexity. A neuron has a cell body, or soma, containing the nucleus and the machinery that keeps the cell alive. Extending from the cell body are branch-like structures called dendrites, which receive signals from other neurons. Think of them as the neuron's ears, listening for messages. And stretching away from the cell body is a long fiber called the axon, which carries signals to other neurons, muscles, or glands, the neuron's voice, if you will. Many axons are wrapped in a fatty substance called myelin, which acts like insulation on a wire, speeding up the signal. The axon ends in terminals that almost, but don't quite, touch the dendrites or cell bodies of other neurons. The tiny gap between them is called a synapse. How neurons communicate. Neurons communicate through a beautiful dance of electrical and chemical signals. When a neuron is at rest, it maintains an electrical charge. The inside is slightly negative compared to the outside. This is called the resting potential. When stimulation reaches a threshold, the neuron fires, and action potential sweeps down the axon like a wave. This is an all-or-nothing event. Either the neuron fires completely, or it doesn't fire at all. When the action potential reaches the axon terminals, it triggers the release of chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. These molecules drift across the synapse and bind to receptors on the next neuron, like keys fitting into locks. This binding can either excite the receiving neuron, making it more likely to fire, or inhibit it, making it less likely to fire. After neurotransmitters have done their job, they're either broken down by enzymes, reabsorbed by the sending neuron in a process called reuptake, or they drift away. This ensures signals are precise and temporary, not lingering indefinitely. Neurotransmitters, the brain's chemical vocabulary. Different neurotransmitters have different effects, and imbalances in these chemicals are associated with various psychological states and disorders. Let's explore some key neurotransmitters. Dopamine is involved in reward, motivation, pleasure, and movement. It's released when we experience something rewarding: food, sex, accomplishment, social connection. Drugs like cocaine and amphetamines artificially increase dopamine, creating intense pleasure but also potential for addiction. Too little dopamine is linked to Parkinson's disease and difficulty experiencing pleasure. Some theories suggest too much dopamine activity in certain brain regions contributes to schizophrenia. Serotonin influences mood, sleep, appetite, and impulse control. Low serotonin is associated with depression, anxiety, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Many antidepressant medications, like SSRIs, work by increasing serotonin availability in the synapse. Norepinephrine, or noradrenaline, is involved in alertness, arousal, and the stress response. It helps mobilize the body for action when threats appear. GABA, or gamma-aminobutyric acid, is the brain's main inhibitory neurotransmitter. It calms neural activity, reducing anxiety and promoting relaxation. Anti-anxiety medications like benzodiazepines enhance GABA's effects. Glutamate is the primary excitatory neurotransmitter involved in learning and memory. Too much can be toxic to neurons. Acetylcholine plays roles in muscle movement, memory, and attention. Loss of acetylcholine-producing neurons is seen in Alzheimer's disease. Endorphins are the brain's natural painkillers and mood elevators, released during exercise, laughter, and other pleasurable activities, giving us that natural high. These chemicals, these neurotransmitters, are the vocabulary of your nervous system, the language your brain speaks to itself and to your body. The structure of the brain. Your brain weighs about 3 pounds, soft, wrinkled, immensely complex. It's often helpful to think of it in terms of 3 main regions that evolved at different times: the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. The hindbrain includes the brainstem and cerebellum. The brainstem, at the very base of the brain where it connects to the spinal cord, controls vital automatic functions: heartbeat, breathing, blood pressure. If this region is damaged, life cannot continue. The medulla and pons are parts of the brainstem. Above them sits the cerebellum, the little brain, which coordinates movement, balance, and motor learning. When you learn to ride a bike or play an instrument, your cerebellum is deeply involved. The midbrain is small but important, containing structures involved in vision, hearing, movement, and arousal. The forebrain is the largest, most complex region, and it's what most people picture when they think of the brain. It includes the thalamus, hypothalamus, limbic system, and cerebral cortex. The thalamus is a sensory relay station. Nearly all sensory information passes through it on the way to higher brain regions. Think of it as a switchboard operator, directing incoming calls to the right departments. The hypothalamus, though tiny, regulates critical functions: body temperature, hunger, thirst, sleep, and the endocrine system. It also plays a role in emotion and pleasure. The limbic system, emotion and memory. The limbic system is a group of structures involved in emotion, motivation, and memory. Key structures include the hippocampus and the amygdala. The hippocampus, shaped like a seahorse, that's what hippocampus means in Greek, is crucial for forming new explicit memories, memories of facts and events you can consciously recall. Damage to the hippocampus results in profound amnesia, the inability to form new long-term memories, though old memories often remain intact. The amygdala is an almond-shaped structure deeply involved in emotion, especially fear. It helps detect threats and trigger the fight-or-flight response. When you feel a jolt of fear at a sudden loud noise, your amygdala is reacting, often before your conscious mind even identifies what the sound was. The amygdala also plays a role in processing other emotions and in emotional memories. Events with strong emotional content are remembered more vividly, in part because the amygdala enhances their encoding. The cerebral cortex, the seat of higher thought. The cerebral cortex is the wrinkled outer layer of the brain, only about a quarter-inch thick but containing the vast majority of neurons. This is where the most complex processing occurs: perception, language, planning, consciousness itself. The cortex is divided into two hemispheres, left and right, connected by a thick bundle of fibers called the corpus callosum that allows them to communicate. Each hemisphere is further divided into 4 lobes, each with specialized functions. The frontal lobes at the front of the brain are involved in planning, decision-making, movement, and aspects of personality. The very front part, the prefrontal cortex, is especially important for executive functions: reasoning, judgment, impulse control, working memory. Damage here can result in dramatic personality changes. The famous case of Phineas Gage, a railroad worker who survived an iron rod piercing his frontal lobe in 1848, illustrated this. He physically recovered, but his personality changed from responsible and mild-mannered to impulsive and inappropriate. The parietal lobes at the top and back of the brain process sensory information about touch, temperature, pain, and body position. They also help with spatial awareness and attention. The occipital lobes at the very back are dedicated primarily to vision. The primary visual cortex receives signals from the eyes and begins the complex process of constructing our visual experience. The temporal lobes on the sides are involved in hearing, language comprehension, and memory. Damage here can impair the ability to recognize faces, understand speech, or form new memories. Brain plasticity, a living, changing organ. For many years, scientists believed the adult brain was fixed, that neurons didn't grow or change after childhood. We now know this is beautifully wrong. The brain exhibits neuroplasticity throughout life, the ability to reorganize itself, form new connections, even generate new neurons in certain regions. When you learn something new, your brain changes. Neural connections strengthen with use and weaken with disuse. Neurons that fire together wire together, as neuroscientist Donald Hebb famously said. Practice and repetition literally reshape your brain. This plasticity allows recovery from brain injury. If one area is damaged, other areas can sometimes take over its functions, especially in younger brains. London taxi drivers, who must memorize thousands of streets, have been shown to have larger hippocampi than average their brains physically adapted to the demands of navigation. Even in healthy adults, new experiences, learning, exercise, and social interaction promote neuroplasticity. Your brain is not a static organ. It's dynamic, responsive, alive with change. The endocrine system, hormones and behavior. While the nervous system communicates through rapid electrical and chemical signals across synapses, another communication system in your body works more slowly but just as powerfully. The endocrine system. Endocrine glands secrete hormones directly into the bloodstream, and these chemical messengers travel throughout the body, influencing mood, energy, growth, stress responses, and much more. The master gland is the pituitary, a pea-sized structure at the base of the brain, controlled by the hypothalamus. The pituitary secretes hormones that regulate other glands throughout the body. The adrenal glands, sitting atop your kidneys, release cortisol during stress, helping mobilize energy and suppress non-essential functions. Chronic stress leading to prolonged high cortisol can impair memory, immune function, and health. The adrenals also release adrenaline, epinephrine, creating that surge of energy and alertness in dangerous situations. The thyroid regulates metabolism and energy levels. The pancreas secretes insulin, regulating blood sugar. The gonads, ovaries, and testes produce sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone, influencing development, mood, and behavior. Hormones and neurotransmitters interact continuously. Your psychological state affects hormone release, and hormones affect your psychological state. Mind and body are one seamless system. Genetics, epigenetics, and behavior. Every cell in your body contains your complete genetic code, DNA sequences inherited from your parents, packaged into 46 chromosomes. Genes provide instructions for building proteins, which in turn build and regulate everything in your body, including your brain. Behavior genetics studies how genes influence behavior. Twin studies, adoption studies, and molecular genetics all contribute to our understanding. Identical twins, sharing 100% of their genes, are more similar in personality, intelligence, and risk for psychological disorders than fraternal twins, who share only 50% of their genes on average. This suggests genetic influence. But identical twins aren't perfectly identical in these traits, which shows environment matters too. Most psychological traits are polygenic, influenced by many genes, each with small effects, interacting with each other and with the environment. There's no single gene for intelligence, depression, or schizophrenia, though certain genes increase or decrease risk. Epigenetics reveals an even more nuanced picture. Environmental factors, stress, nutrition, toxins, experiences, can affect whether genes are expressed without changing the DNA sequence itself. Chemical tags added to DNA can turn genes on or off. Remarkably, some epigenetic changes can even be passed to offspring, meaning experiences can potentially affect future generations. This is a profound and hopeful finding. We are not simply products of our genes. Experience matters, environment matters, and the interplay between nature and nurture is more intricate and dynamic than early scientists imagined. Sensation, perception, and consciousness. Sensation versus perception. Let us now turn to how we know the world around us, how we take in information and create the rich tapestry of experience we call reality. This process begins with sensation and continues through perception, two related but distinct processes. Sensation is the process by which our sensory receptors and nervous system receive and represent stimulus energy from our environment. It's raw data coming in, light waves hitting your retina, sound waves vibrating your eardrum, chemicals binding to receptors in your nose. Perception is the process of organizing and interpreting this sensory information, enabling us to recognize meaningful objects and events. Perception is where sensation becomes experience, where patterns of light become the face of someone you love, where vibrations in the air become music or speech. Think of it this way: sensation is the ingredients, perception is the meal. Sensation is the alphabet, perception is the story. Sensory thresholds and adaptation. For a stimulus to be sensed, it must exceed a certain intensity, the absolute threshold. This is the minimum stimulation needed to detect a particular stimulus 50% of the time. The absolute threshold for vision, for example, is the equivalent of a candle flame seen from 30 miles away on a clear, dark night. For hearing, it's a watch ticking in a quiet room 20 feet away. Below the absolute threshold lies subliminal perception, stimuli too weak to consciously detect, but which might still influence us. Research shows some subliminal effects exist, though they're typically small and fleeting, not the mind control of popular imagination. The difference threshold, or just noticeable difference, is the minimum difference between two stimuli required for detection 50% of the time. Weber's law states that this difference is a constant proportion. You notice a 1-pound difference more easily when comparing 5-pound and 6-pound weights than when comparing 50-pound and 51-pound weights. Our senses also show adaptation, decreased sensitivity after constant stimulation. Jump into a cold pool and it feels shockingly cold, but after a few minutes you adjust. You adapt. Enter a room with a strong smell and soon you don't notice it anymore. This adaptation is useful. It allows our senses to remain sensitive to changes, to new information, rather than being overwhelmed by constant stimuli. Vision, our dominant sense. For most humans, vision is the dominant sense. Light, electromagnetic radiation visible to humans enters the eye through the cornea, passes through the pupil, the opening whose size is controlled by the iris, and is focused by the lens onto the retina at the back of the eye. The retina contains millions of photoreceptor cells, rods and cones. Rods, numbering about 120 million, are sensitive to dim light and allow us to see in low illumination, but they don't detect color or fine detail. Cones, about 6 million of them, function in bright light and enable us to see color and detail. There are 3 types of cones, each sensitive to different wavelengths corresponding roughly to red, green, and blue. Color vision emerges from the pattern of activation across these 3 cone types. The information from rods and cones is processed through several layers of cells in the retina, then transmitted via the optic nerve to the brain. The optic nerves from both eyes meet at the optic chiasm, where fibers from the inside half of each retina cross to the opposite side of the brain. This ensures that each hemisphere processes information from the opposite visual field. Visual information reaches the thalamus and is then relayed to the primary visual cortex in the occipital lobe. But seeing isn't just one process happening in one place. Visual information is processed in parallel streams throughout the visual cortex, with different areas specializing in color, motion, form, and depth. These separate streams are integrated to create our unified visual experience, though how exactly this binding occurs remains one of neuroscience's mysteries. Hearing, waves of pressure. Hearing begins with sound waves, compressions and expansions of air molecules. Sound waves enter the outer ear, travel down the auditory canal, and cause the eardrum to vibrate. These vibrations pass through 3 tiny bones in the middle ear: the hammer, anvil, and stirrup, malleus, incus, and stapes, which amplify the vibrations and transmit them to the cochlea. The cochlea is a fluid-filled, snail-shaped structure in the inner ear. Inside it lies the basilar membrane, upon which sits the organ of Corti containing thousands of hair cells. As vibrations move the fluid in the cochlea, they cause the basilar membrane to ripple. This bends the hair cells, which transduce the mechanical energy into neural signals sent via the auditory nerve to the brain. Different frequencies of sound cause maximum vibration at different locations along the basilar membrane. High frequencies stimulate the base, near the oval window where vibrations enter. Low frequencies stimulate the apex at the far end. This place coding, combined with the rate at which neurons fire, allows us to perceive pitch. From the cochlea, auditory information travels to the brainstem, thalamus, and auditory cortex in the temporal lobe. We can locate sounds in space by comparing the timing and intensity of sounds reaching each ear. A sound from the right reaches your right ear slightly sooner and louder than your left. The other senses. Touch, taste, and smell complete our traditional 5 senses, though we actually have more senses than 5. Touch involves several different sensations: pressure, temperature, and pain. Specialized receptors in the skin and deeper tissues respond to different types of stimulation. The somatosensory cortex in the parietal lobe processes touch information, with different areas corresponding to different body parts, and sensitive areas like the hands and lips have disproportionately large representation. Pain is a complex experience involving both sensory and emotional components. The gate control theory suggests that pain signals can be modulated by other sensory input or by signals from the brain, which is why rubbing an injury or distracting yourself can reduce pain. Endorphins, the brain's natural painkillers, can also reduce pain. This is part of why exercise sometimes creates a pain-relieving effect. Taste begins with taste buds on the tongue and elsewhere in the mouth. There are 5 basic taste qualities: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami savory. Each type of taste receptor responds to different chemicals. Much of what we think of as taste is actually smell. The flavor of food arises from the combination of taste, smell, texture, and temperature. Smell, or olfaction, begins when airborne molecules bind to receptors in the olfactory epithelium, high in the nasal cavity. Humans have about 400 types of olfactory receptors, and combinations of activated receptors create our experience of different smells. Olfactory information projects directly to the olfactory bulb and then to various brain areas, including the limbic system. This is why smells can evoke powerful emotional memories. Smell has a direct line to emotion and memory structures. We also have kinesthetic sense, body position, and movement, provided by receptors in muscles, tendons, and joints, and vestibular sense, balance, and spatial orientation, provided by structures in the inner ear. A perceptual organization, making sense of sensation. Raw sensory data is meaningless without perceptual organization. Gestalt psychologists studied how we organize sensory information into meaningful wholes, identifying several principles of perceptual grouping. Figure-ground organization. We perceive objects, figures, as distinct from their backgrounds. Think of the famous faces vase illusion. You see either 2 faces or a vase, but not both simultaneously. Proximity. Elements close together are perceived as belonging together. Similarity. Similar elements are grouped together. Continuity. We perceive smooth, continuous patterns rather than discontinuous ones. Closure. We fill in gaps to perceive complete objects. These principles reflect the brain's active role in constructing perception. Perception isn't passive reception, but active construction. We also perceive depth, even though the retina receives only a 2-dimensional image. Binocular cues like retinal disparity, the slightly different images from each eye, and convergence, how much the eyes turn inward to focus, provide depth information. Monocular cues like relative size, linear perspective, texture gradient, and motion parallax allow depth perception with one eye. Perceptual constancies help us recognize objects despite changes in the sensory information reaching us. Size constancy. A person walking away doesn't seem to shrink, even though their image on your retina does. Shape constancy. A door is perceived as rectangular even when viewed at an angle where its retinal image is a trapezoid. Lightness constancy. A white shirt appears white in both bright sunlight and dim indoor light, despite huge differences in the light it reflects. Perceptual illusions. Sometimes our perceptual processes lead us astray, creating illusions, situations where perception differs from physical reality. The Mueller-Lyer illusion shows two lines of equal length, but one appears longer because of the angles of fins at the ends. The Ponzo illusion makes two identical lines appear different lengths due to linear perspective cues. These illusions aren't failures, they reveal the brain's interpretive strategies. Our perceptual system evolved to work well in the three-dimensional world, sometimes applying rules that mislead us in artificial two-dimensional displays. States of consciousness. Consciousness itself, the subjective experience of awareness, remains one of psychology's deepest mysteries. We experience different states of consciousness, from full wakefulness to deep sleep. Normal waking consciousness involves alertness, awareness of external stimuli, and controlled thought. But even within wakefulness, attention can focus narrowly or distribute broadly. You can be absorbed in a book, hardly aware of your surroundings, or you can maintain broad vigilance, monitoring many things at once. Sleep, the restorative state. Sleep is not simply absence of wakefulness, but an active, complex state essential for health and functioning. We cycle through distinct stages of sleep approximately every 90 minutes throughout the night. Stage 1, or N1, is light sleep, a transition between waking and sleep. Brain waves slow, muscles relax, and you may experience hypnagogic sensations, the feeling of falling or sudden jerks. Stage 2, N2, occupies about 50% of total sleep. Brain waves continue slowing, with occasional bursts called sleep spindles and K-complexes. Body temperature drops, heart rate slows. Stage 3, N3, is deep, slow-wave sleep. Brain waves are large and slow delta waves. This is the most restorative sleep, when the body repairs tissue, builds bone and muscle, and strengthens the immune system. It's hard to wake someone from deep sleep, and if awakened, they feel disoriented. After cycling through these stages, we enter REM, rapid eye movement sleep. Brain activity increases, resembling waking patterns. Eyes dart rapidly beneath closed lids. Most vivid dreams occur during REM sleep. Paradoxically, while the brain is active, voluntary muscles are paralyzed, except for the eyes and diaphragm, perhaps to prevent us from acting out dreams. Across the night, we cycle through these stages, with more deep sleep early and more REM sleep toward morning. Both are essential. Deep sleep supports physical restoration and memory consolidation. REM sleep supports emotional regulation, memory processing, and brain development. Sleep deprivation impairs attention, memory, judgment, emotional regulation, and immune function. Chronic sleep loss is linked to obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and depression. Yet modern life often treats sleep as optional, a luxury to sacrifice for productivity. This is a dangerous mistake. Sleep is a biological necessity. Dreams, theater of the mind. Why do we dream? Freud believed dreams express unconscious wishes in disguised form, requiring interpretation to reveal their hidden meaning. Most modern researchers are skeptical of this specific claim, though the idea that dreams reflect our concerns and emotions has some support. The activation synthesis theory suggests dreams result from the brain trying to make sense of random neural activity during REM sleep. More recent theories emphasize memory consolidation. Dreams may help process and integrate experiences and emotions. Dream content often involves familiar people and settings, but with bizarre, illogical elements. Most dreams are forgotten upon waking unless immediately recorded. Many people experience lucid dreaming, becoming aware you're dreaming while the dream continues, sometimes allowing some control over the dream narrative. Altered states, hypnosis, meditation, and psychoactive substances. Hypnosis involves focused attention, reduced peripheral awareness, and enhanced suggestibility. Hypnotized individuals may experience alterations in perception, memory, or voluntary action in response to suggestions. Hypnosis is useful for pain management, habit change, and accessing memories. Though its limitations are real, hypnosis can't force people to violate their values, and memories recovered under hypnosis can be unreliable or false. Meditation involves practices that train attention and awareness, producing a mentally clear, calm, emotionally stable state. Regular meditation practice is associated with reduced stress, improved attention, decreased anxiety and depression, and changes in brain structure, particularly in areas related to attention, emotion regulation, and self-awareness. Psychoactive drugs alter consciousness by changing neurotransmitter activity. Depressants like alcohol and benzodiazepines reduce neural activity, creating relaxation or sedation, but impairing judgment and coordination. Stimulants like caffeine, cocaine, and amphetamines increase alertness and energy, but can lead to dependence and health problems. Hallucinogens like LSD and psilocybin distort perception and create hallucinations. Opioids relieve pain and produce euphoria, but carry high risk of addiction and overdose. Each class of drug has specific effects and risks, and understanding these helps in making informed decisions. Circadian rhythms. Our bodies follow circadian rhythms, roughly 24-hour cycles of biological processes. The suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus acts as the master biological clock, synchronized by light exposure detected by the retina. Circadian rhythms regulate sleep-wake cycles, body temperature, hormone release, and more. Disruption of circadian rhythms from shift work, jet lag, or irregular schedules can impair functioning and health. Exposure to bright screens before bed can suppress melatonin, the hormone that promotes sleep, making it harder to fall asleep. Respecting our natural rhythms supports health and well-being. Learning and memory. Classical conditioning, learning by association. Learning is any relatively permanent change in behavior or knowledge resulting from experience. One fundamental form of learning is classical conditioning, discovered accidentally by Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov while studying digestion in dogs. Pavlov noticed that dogs began salivating not only when food was placed in their mouths, but also when they saw the assistant who usually fed them. This suggested they had learned to associate the assistant with food. Pavlov systematically studied this, pairing a neutral stimulus, a tone, with food, which naturally elicits salivation. After repeated pairings, the tone alone came to elicit salivation. In classical conditioning terms, the food is an unconditioned stimulus, UCS. It naturally, without learning, produces salivation, the unconditioned response, UCR. The tone is a neutral stimulus that becomes a conditioned stimulus, CS, through pairing with the UCS. The salivation in response to the tone is a conditioned response, CR, learned through experience. Classical conditioning happens throughout life. If you become nauseous after eating a particular food, you may develop an aversion to that food even years later. If you're bitten by a dog, you might feel anxious around dogs afterward. Advertising uses classical conditioning, pairing products with attractive images or pleasant music to create positive associations. Key principles include acquisition, the initial learning; extinction, the CR weakens when the CS is repeatedly presented without the UCS; spontaneous recovery. After extinction, the CR may reappear after a rest period. Generalization, the CR occurs to stimuli similar to the CS. And discrimination, learning to respond only to specific stimuli. Classical conditioning shapes emotional responses, preferences, fears, and physiological reactions, often without conscious awareness. Operant conditioning, learning from consequences. While classical conditioning involves learning associations between stimuli, operant conditioning involves learning from the consequences of behavior. B.F. Skinner developed this concept, building on Edward Thorndike's law of effect. Behaviors followed by satisfying consequences become more likely. Behaviors followed by unpleasant consequences become less likely. Skinner studied this systematically using operant chambers, often called Skinner boxes, in which animals pressed levers or pecked keys to receive food or avoid shocks. He distinguished between reinforcement, which increases behavior, and punishment, which decreases behavior. A positive reinforcement. Adding something pleasant increases behavior, praise increases studying. Negative reinforcement. Removing something unpleasant increases behavior. Taking aspirin removes a headache, making aspirin taking more likely. A positive punishment. Adding something unpleasant decreases behavior. A speeding ticket decreases speeding. Negative punishment. Removing something pleasant decreases behavior. Taking away phone privileges decreases rule breaking. Reinforcement is generally more effective than punishment for shaping behavior. Punishment may suppress behavior temporarily, but doesn't teach alternative behaviors and can create anxiety or resentment. Schedules of reinforcement. The timing and pattern of reinforcement matters greatly. Continuous reinforcement, reinforcing every occurrence, produces rapid learning but rapid extinction when reinforcement stops. Partial or intermittent reinforcement, reinforcing only some occurrences, produces slower learning but much greater resistance to extinction. There are 4 basic partial schedules. Fixed ratio, reinforcement after a set number of responses, paid per piece completed. Variable ratio, reinforcement after an unpredictable number of responses, gambling, slot machines. This produces high, steady response rates and is most resistant to extinction. Fixed interval, reinforcement for the first response after a fixed time period, weekly paycheck. Variable interval, reinforcement for the first response after varying time periods, checking email. This produces steady, moderate responding. Understanding these schedules helps explain why some behaviors are so persistent. Gambling is notoriously hard to extinguish because it operates on a variable ratio schedule. Observational learning. Albert Bandura demonstrated that we don't always need direct reinforcement to learn. We also learn by observing others. In his famous Bobo doll experiments, children who watched an adult behaving aggressively toward an inflatable doll were more likely to imitate that behavior later. Observational learning, or social learning, involves attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. We observe the model, remember what we saw, physically perform the behavior, and are motivated by the consequences we observe the model experiencing or anticipate for ourselves. This explains how children learn language, social skills, and cultural norms largely through observation. It also has implications for media violence. Observing aggression, even in fictional contexts, can increase aggressive thoughts and behaviors, especially in children. Modeling is a powerful teaching tool. We learn continuously from the examples around us. Memory, the 3-stage model. Memory is the process of encoding, storing, and retrieving information. The Atkinson-Shiffrin model proposes 3 stages of memory: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. Sensory memory is the immediate, very brief recording of sensory information. Iconic memory, visual, lasts a fraction of a second. Echoic memory, auditory, lasts a few seconds. Most sensory input fades away unless attention focuses on it. Short-term memory, or working memory, holds information temporarily, roughly 20-30 seconds without rehearsal, and has limited capacity, about 7 plus or minus 2 items, according to George Miller's famous paper. You can extend short-term memory through rehearsal repetition, or chunking, grouping information into meaningful units, remembering a phone number as 3 chunks rather than 10 individual digits. Long-term memory is the relatively permanent and essentially limitless storage of information. Information moves from short-term to long-term memory through elaborative rehearsal, processing information deeply by considering its meaning, relating it to existing knowledge, and forming associations. Types of long-term memory. Long-term memory isn't a single system, but includes different types. Explicit memory, declarative memory, involves conscious recollection of facts and events. It includes episodic memory, personal experiences, like your high school graduation, and semantic memory, general knowledge and facts, like knowing Paris is the capital of France. Implicit memory, non-declarative memory, involves unconscious retention, such as skills and conditioned responses. Procedural memory, how to ride a bike, tie shoes, play an instrument, is a type of implicit memory. Once learned, these skills operate automatically without conscious thought. This distinction has been demonstrated by patient H.M., who had his hippocampus removed to treat severe epilepsy. He couldn't form new explicit memories, meeting someone and seconds later having no memory of the encounter. But he could still learn new motor skills, demonstrating intact implicit memory, though he couldn't remember practicing them. Encoding, getting information in. How well we remember depends largely on how we encode information initially. Effortful processing requires attention and conscious effort, studying for an exam, memorizing a poem. Automatic processing happens without conscious awareness, remembering what you ate for breakfast, how you got home. Levels of processing matter. Shallow processing, focusing on surface features, like how a word sounds, produces weak memories. Deep processing, focusing on meaning, relating new information to existing knowledge, considering implications, produces strong, durable memories. Elaboration, visual imagery, organization, and self-reference all enhance encoding. The more connections you create between new information and existing knowledge, the better you'll remember. Spacing effect, distributed practice, studying over multiple sessions, is more effective than massed practice cramming. Testing effect, retrieving information strengthens memory more than simply rereading. Practice tests improve learning more than additional study time. Retrieval, getting information out. Retrieval is accessing stored information. Recognition, identifying previously encountered information, is easier than recall, retrieving information without cues, which is why multiple-choice tests are easier than fill-in-the-blank. Retrieval cues, contextual or associative hints, facilitate access to memories. The encoding specificity principle states that memory is best when the retrieval context matches the encoding context. Study in the room where you'll take the test, and you may perform better. Being in a particular mood can trigger memories formed in that mood, state-dependent memory. Forgetting, when memory fails. Forgetting is the inability to retrieve stored information. Hermann Ebbinghaus studied forgetting systematically, discovering the forgetting curve. Memory drops rapidly at first, then levels off. Much forgetting happens soon after learning. Why do we forget? Several theories offer explanations. Encoding failure. Information never entered long-term memory in the first place. Many forgotten things were never truly learned. Storage decay. Memories fade over time, especially if unused. Neural connections weaken without activation. Retrieval failure. The information is stored but inaccessible without proper cues. This explains the tip of the tongue phenomenon, you know something, but can't quite retrieve it. Interference. Other memories interfere with retrieval. Proactive interference occurs when old information disrupts recall of new information. Retroactive interference occurs when new information disrupts recall of old information. Motivated forgetting. Sometimes we unconsciously suppress unpleasant memories, though the reality and mechanisms of this remain controversial. Memory construction and distortion. Memory isn't a perfect recording but a reconstruction. Each time we retrieve a memory, we rebuild it from stored elements, and that reconstruction is subject to distortion. Elizabeth Loftus demonstrated that memories can be altered by misleading information presented after an event. In one study, people who saw a car accident were later asked either, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? Or, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? Those who heard smashed gave higher speed estimates and were more likely to later remember broken glass that wasn't actually present. False memories can be implanted. People have been led to remember events that never happened, getting lost in a mall as a child, having a hot air balloon ride through suggestion and repeated imagination. This has serious implications for eyewitness testimony. Confident, detailed memories can be completely wrong. Memory is not like a video recording, but more like a Wikipedia page that can be edited, sometimes without your awareness. Improving memory. Understanding memory's mechanisms suggests strategies for improvement. Pay attention, encoding fails without attention. Process deeply, consider meaning, not just surface features. Elaborate, create associations and connections. Use visual imagery, pictures are remembered better than words. Organize information, create meaningful structure. Space learning over time, distributed practice. Test yourself, retrieval practice strengthens memory. Use mnemonic devices, memory aids like acronyms, rhymes, the method of loci. Get adequate sleep. Sleep consolidates memories. Reduce interference. Study similar subjects at different times. Stay physically and mentally active. Exercise and mental stimulation support brain health. Memory is not fixed but trainable. With understanding and practice, you can become a more effective learner. Cognition, intelligence, and language. Thinking, the architecture of thought. Cognition encompasses all mental activities involved in acquiring, processing, storing, and using knowledge. Thinking involves manipulating mental representations, concepts, images, schemas to reach goals. Concepts are mental categories that group objects, events, or ideas with common properties. Some concepts have clear definitions, A triangle is a closed figure with 3 sides, but most are fuzzy, based on prototypes, the most typical example. Your prototype for bird might be a robin. A penguin is a bird, but less typical. Concepts allow us to organize knowledge efficiently, making inferences and predictions. Schemas are organized knowledge structures about concepts, situations, or events. Your restaurant schema includes expectations about being seated, ordering, eating, and paying. It guides behavior and interpretation. Schemas can also distort perception, leading us to notice schema-consistent information and overlook inconsistencies. Problem solving. Problems occur when there's a discrepancy between a current state and a goal state, and the path isn't obvious. Problem solving involves identifying the problem, generating possible solutions, evaluating options, and implementing a solution. Algorithms are step-by-step procedures that guarantee a solution if followed correctly, like a recipe. They're reliable, but can be slow and impractical for complex problems. Heuristics are mental shortcuts, rules of thumb that usually work but aren't guaranteed. The means-ends heuristic involves reducing the difference between current and goal states through subgoals. Working backward involves starting with the goal and figuring out what would be required. Trial and error involves trying different solutions until one works. Insight is sudden realization of a solution. Wolfgang Köhler studied insight in chimpanzees, who would suddenly grasp how to stack boxes and use a stick to reach bananas. Insight feels like an aha moment, often after a period of incubation. Stepping away from the problem allows unconscious processing. Obstacles to problem solving. Mental sets are tendencies to approach problems in ways that worked previously, which can blind us to novel solutions. Functional fixedness is difficulty seeing new uses for objects. Can you think of a way to mount a candle on a wall if you have a box of matches and some tacks? People often fail to see that the box itself can serve as a platform. They see it only as a container, its familiar function. Confirmation bias leads us to seek information confirming our hypotheses and ignore contradicting information. We notice evidence supporting our beliefs and discount contrary evidence. This can entrench incorrect ideas and fuel polarization. Judgment and decision-making. Heuristics also guide judgment and decision-making, sometimes leading to systematic errors or biases. The availability heuristic. We judge likelihood based on how easily examples come to mind. Because plane crashes receive extensive media coverage, people often overestimate their frequency and underestimate more common dangers like car accidents. Vivid, recent, or emotionally salient events are most available to memory, skewing judgments. The representativeness heuristic. We judge probability based on how much something resembles a typical case. Told that Linda is outspoken and concerned with social justice, people judge it more likely that Linda is a bank teller and a feminist than simply Linda is a bank teller. Even though the first statement is a subset and therefore mathematically less probable. She resembles our stereotype of a feminist, so representativeness overrides logic. Anchoring, initial information serves as a reference point, influencing subsequent judgments. Asked whether the population of Istanbul is more or less than 2 million, then asked to estimate the actual population, people give lower estimates than if first asked whether it's more or less than 15 million. The initial number anchors judgment. Framing, how information is presented affects decisions. People prefer a medical treatment with a 90% survival rate over one with a 10% mortality rate, even though they're identical. Loss framing, you'll lose $50, has more impact than gain framing, you'll save $50. Reflecting loss aversion, losses loom larger than equivalent gains. Understanding these biases doesn't eliminate them, but allows us to recognize and sometimes compensate for them, improving decision quality. Intelligence, measuring mental ability. Intelligence is a slippery concept. Informally, we recognize it, the ability to learn, reason, solve problems, think abstractly, and adapt to new situations. But measuring it precisely and fairly has proven controversial and challenging. Charles Spearman proposed that a general intelligence factor, or G, underlies specific abilities. People who score high on one cognitive test tend to score high on others, suggesting an underlying general ability. Spearman also recognized specific abilities, S factors, unique to particular tasks. L. Thurstone challenged this, proposing 7 primary mental abilities: verbal comprehension, word fluency, number facility, spatial visualization, associative memory, perceptual speed, reasoning. Factor analysis supported multiple distinct abilities rather than a single G. Howard Gardner proposed a theory of multiple intelligences, including linguistic, logical mathematical, spatial, musical, bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalistic. Gardner argued that traditional tests overemphasize linguistic and logical mathematical intelligence while neglecting other valuable abilities. Critics counter that some intelligences might better be called talents or skills, and that Gardner's model lacks strong empirical support. Robert Sternberg's triarchic theory identifies 3 types of intelligence: analytical, problem-solving, abstract reasoning, measured by traditional IQ tests; creative, generating novel ideas, adapting to new situations; and practical, adapting to everyday environments, street smarts. Sternberg argues successful intelligence involves balancing all 3. Emotional intelligence, popularized by Daniel Goleman, involves perceiving, understanding, managing, and using emotions effectively. It includes self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. High emotional intelligence predicts success in relationships and work, often beyond what IQ predicts. IQ tests and controversies. Alfred Binet developed the first intelligence test in 1905 to identify French schoolchildren needing special help. He measured mental age, the level of performance typical for a given age. A child performing like an average 8-year-old has a mental age of 8, regardless of chronological age. The intelligence quotient, or IQ, was originally calculated as mental age divided by chronological age, multiplied by 100. An 8-year-old performing like an 8-year-old has an IQ of 100, average. A 8-year-old performing like a 10-year-old has an IQ of 125. Modern IQ tests, like the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, WAIS, use deviation IQ scores are standardized so the average is 100 and the standard deviation is 15. About 68% of people score between 85 and 115, 95% between 70 and 130. IQ tests predict academic performance fairly well, which isn't surprising since they were designed for that purpose. They also correlate moderately with job performance, income, and other life outcomes, though many factors beyond IQ matter. Controversies abound. Do IQ tests measure innate ability or learned knowledge and skills? Tests inevitably reflect cultural knowledge and values, potentially biasing scores. Stereotype threat, anxiety caused by awareness of negative stereotypes about one's group can depress test performance. Group differences in average scores, racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, have been misused to justify discrimination, though such differences reflect complex interactions of genetics, environment, opportunity, and culture, not innate differences in potential. IQ is not fixed. Scores can change significantly over time, especially with environmental changes. The Flynn effect describes substantial IQ score increases across generations in many countries, almost certainly due to environmental improvements, nutrition, education, complexity of modern life, rather than genetic changes. A language, the human specialty. Language is a system of symbols and rules for combining them to communicate meaning. It's uniquely flexible and generative. We can create and understand sentences we've never encountered before. Language has structure at multiple levels. Phonemes are the smallest units of sound that distinguish meaning. In English, the difference between bat and pat is a single phoneme. Morphemes are the smallest units of meaning, happiness. Syntax refers to rules for combining words into grammatically correct sentences. Semantics concerns meaning, and pragmatics concerns language use in social contexts. A language development. Children acquire language with remarkable ease, progressing through predictable stages. Infants babble by 6 months, producing a variety of sounds. By 12 months, they typically produce their first words. Between 18-24 months, vocabulary explodes and 2-word telegraphic speech emerges. Want milk? Grammar complexity increases rapidly, and by age 5 or 6, most children speak grammatically with large vocabularies. How do children learn language so quickly? Behaviorists like Skinner argued that language is learned through imitation and reinforcement. But Noam Chomsky countered that language is too complex and acquired too rapidly for this explanation. Children produce novel sentences they've never heard, suggesting they're not just imitating. They make systematic errors, I goed, that reveal rule learning, not random mistakes. Chomsky proposed that humans have an innate language acquisition device, a biological preparedness for language with universal grammar principles common to all languages. Children exposed to language naturally extract these patterns. Supporting this, there appears to be a critical period for language acquisition. Children who learn language early, before puberty, achieve native fluency. Those who learn later, including second languages, rarely achieve native-like mastery, though they can certainly become proficient. Tragic cases of language deprivation, like Jeannie, a girl isolated from language until age 13, show that without early language exposure, full language development may never occur. Bilingualism. Learning multiple languages was once thought to confuse children and impair cognitive development. Research now shows the opposite. Bilinguals often show enhanced executive function, better attention control, task switching, and working memory. They develop metalinguistic awareness, understanding language as a system. Cognitive benefits appear strongest in those who use both languages regularly. While bilingual children may initially have slightly smaller vocabularies in each language, this equalizes over time, and the total vocabulary across both languages is typically larger. Far from being a burden, bilingualism is a cognitive advantage. Language and thought. Does language shape thought, or does thought shape language? The linguistic relativity hypothesis, Horph's hypothesis, proposes that language determines or strongly influences thought. Evidence is mixed. Some studies show that language can influence perception. Different languages carve up the color spectrum differently, affecting color discrimination. But core cognitive abilities and concepts seem universal across cultures despite language differences. Most researchers accept a weaker version. Language influences thought but doesn't rigidly determine it. The words available in your language make certain concepts easier or harder to think about and communicate, but you're not imprisoned by your language. Development across the LIFESPAN. Prenatal development. Human development begins at conception, when sperm and egg unite to form a zygote. This single cell contains all genetic information needed to build a human being. The zygote divides rapidly, becoming a blastocyst that implants in the uterine wall about a week after conception. The prenatal period divides into 3 stages. The germinal stage, conception to 2 weeks, involves rapid cell division and implantation. The embryonic stage, 2 weeks to 8 weeks, sees the formation of major organs and systems, heart, brain, limbs. This is a critical period when the developing embryo is most vulnerable to teratogens, harmful substances like alcohol, drugs, viruses, or toxins that can cause birth defects. The fetal stage, 8 weeks to birth, involves growth and refinement. By the end of this stage, the fetus can hear, taste, and feel. Mother's stress, nutrition, and health affect fetal development. Fetal alcohol syndrome, caused by maternal alcohol consumption, can result in physical abnormalities and cognitive impairments. This is why abstaining from alcohol and other harmful substances during pregnancy is strongly recommended. Infancy, the foundations. Infants are born with remarkable capacities and predispositions. Newborns prefer looking at faces, recognizing their mother's voice, and can imitate simple facial expressions, sticking out their tongue when an adult does. These abilities suggest evolution prepared infants for social connection. Motor development follows a predictable sequence: lifting head, rolling over, sitting, crawling, standing, walking. The sequence is universal across cultures, suggesting biological programming, though timing varies based on genetics and opportunity for practice. Brain development is explosive in infancy. At birth, the brain is about 25% of adult size. By age 2, it's 75%. Neural connections proliferate through synaptogenesis, then are pruned based on experience. Frequently used connections strengthen, unused ones are eliminated. This neural sculpting allows the brain to specialize for the particular environment and experiences the child encounters. Cognitive development, Piaget stages. Jean Piaget revolutionized understanding of cognitive development. Through careful observation, including of his own children, Piaget proposed that children actively construct understanding through interaction with their environment. Thinking progresses through qualitatively distinct stages. The sensory-motor stage, birth to 2 years, involves learning through sensory experience and motor actions. Infants develop object permanence, understanding that objects continue to exist even when out of sight. This seems obvious to adults, but is a major cognitive achievement. The preoperational stage, 2 to 7 years, sees rapid language development and symbolic thinking, using words and images to represent objects and experiences. But thinking is egocentric, difficulty taking others' perspectives, lacks conservation, understanding that quantity remains constant despite changes in appearance, and is illogical by adult standards. The concrete operational stage, 7 to 11 years, brings logical thinking about concrete, tangible things. Children master conservation, can classify objects systematically, and understand reversibility operations can be undone. But abstract, hypothetical thinking remains difficult. The formal operational stage, 12 years onward, involves abstract reasoning, hypothetical thinking, and systematic problem-solving. Adolescents can reason about possibilities, test hypotheses, and think about thinking itself metacognition. Piaget's insights remain valuable, but his timeline was too rigid. Development is more variable and continuous than his stages suggest. He underestimated infants' abilities and the role of social interaction. Still, his core idea that children actively construct knowledge and that thinking changes qualitatively with development endures. Psychosocial development, Erikson's stages. Erik Erikson proposed that development continues throughout life, each stage presenting a psychosocial crisis to resolve. Infancy, trust versus mistrust. Will caregivers meet needs reliably? Responsive care fosters basic trust. Toddlerhood, autonomy versus shame and doubt. Can I do things myself? Encouragement builds confidence. Excessive criticism creates doubt. Preschool, initiative versus guilt. Can I try new things, explore, ask questions? Support fosters initiative. Discouragement fosters guilt. School age, industry versus inferiority. Can I master skills valued by my culture? Success builds competence. Repeated failure breeds inferiority. Adolescence, identity versus role confusion. Who am I? What are my values, goals, beliefs? Successfully forming an identity provides direction. Failing creates confusion. Young adulthood, intimacy versus isolation. Can I form close, meaningful relationships? Success brings intimacy. Failure brings isolation. Middle adulthood, generativity versus stagnation. Am I contributing to society, guiding the next generation? Generativity involves productivity and caring. Stagnation involves self-absorption. Late adulthood, integrity versus despair. Looking back, was my life meaningful? Integrity involves acceptance and satisfaction. Despair involves regret and bitterness. Erikson emphasized that each stage builds on previous ones, and challenges recur throughout life. Successfully resolving early crises provides a foundation for later ones. Attachment, the foundation of relationships. John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth studied attachment, the deep emotional bond between infant and caregiver. Bowlby proposed that attachment is biologically based, evolved to keep vulnerable infants close to caregivers for protection. Ainsworth's strange situation procedure assessed attachment quality by observing infants' responses when separated from and reunited with their mother. She identified 3 attachment styles. Secure attachment, about 60–70% of infants. The infant explores confidently when mother is present, shows distress when she leaves, and greets her positively on return. These infants have learned that their caregiver is responsive and available. Anxious ambivalent attachment, about 10–15%. The infant is clingy, reluctant to explore, extremely distressed by separation, and ambivalent on reunion, seeking contact, but also resisting it. These infants have experienced inconsistent caregiving. Avoidant attachment, about 20%. The infant shows little distress at separation and avoids the mother on reunion. These infants have learned that their caregiver is unresponsive, so they suppress attachment behaviors. Later research identified disorganized attachment, about 5–10%, characterized by confused, contradictory behaviors, often associated with frightening or abusive caregiving. Attachment quality predicts later development. Securely attached children tend to be more confident, socially competent, and emotionally regulated. Early attachment creates internal working models, expectations about relationships that influence later interactions. Importantly, attachment isn't fixed. Responsive care can improve insecure attachment, and adverse experiences can disrupt secure attachment. Relationships throughout life offer opportunities for healing and growth. Moral development, Kohlberg stages. Lawrence Kohlberg studied moral reasoning by presenting moral dilemmas and analyzing the reasoning behind people's judgments. He identified 3 levels, each with 2 stages. A pre-conventional morality, childhood, moral reasoning based on consequences. Stage 1, obedience to avoid punishment. Stage 2, self-interest, doing what benefits oneself. Conventional morality, adolescence and beyond, moral reasoning based on social rules and others' approval. Stage 3, being good to gain approval, maintaining relationships. Stage 4, obeying laws and rules to maintain social order. Post-conventional morality, adulthood if at all, moral reasoning based on abstract principles. Stage 5, social contract, rules should promote the greatest good and can be changed if unjust. Stage 6, universal ethical principles, justice, human rights, equality. Not everyone reaches the highest stages. Kohlberg's research focused on boys and emphasized justice reasoning. Carol Gilligan criticized this, proposing that women may emphasize care and relationships in moral reasoning as much as abstract justice, representing a different but equally valid moral voice. Cross-cultural research shows that moral values vary, though some principles, fairness, caring, loyalty, appear universal. Moral development involves not just reasoning but emotion, intuition, and behavior. Adolescence, transition and transformation. Adolescence spans roughly ages 12–18, marked by puberty, the biological transition to sexual maturity. Hormones trigger physical changes. Growth spurts, development of primary and secondary sex characteristics, brain maturation. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning, impulse control, and judgment, continues developing into the mid-20s. Meanwhile, the limbic system, involved in emotion and reward, is highly active. This mismatch helps explain adolescent risk-taking and emotional intensity. Cognitive development during adolescence includes improved abstract thinking, metacognition, and complex reasoning. Adolescents become capable of contemplating hypothetical possibilities, considering multiple perspectives, and thinking about their own thinking. Identity formation is a central task. Adolescents explore different roles, beliefs, values, and goals, ideally emerging with a coherent sense of self. This can involve experimentation and rebellion. Peer relationships become intensely important, sometimes eclipsing parental influence in daily decisions, though parental influence remains strong in major values and life decisions. Adolescence is often viewed as a time of storm and stress, but research shows most adolescents navigate this period successfully. Supportive families, positive peer groups, and meaningful opportunities for contribution promote healthy development. Adulthood and aging. Early adulthood, 20s-40s, involves establishing independence, career, intimate relationships, and often starting families. Physical abilities peak in the 20s. Cognitive abilities remain strong, and fluid intelligence, abstract reasoning, speed may decline slightly, but crystallized intelligence, accumulated knowledge and skills, continues increasing. Middle adulthood, 40s-60s, brings stability, peak earning years, and often sandwich generation responsibilities, caring for both children and aging parents. Physical changes include decreased sensory acuity, slower metabolism, and for women, menopause. Most people maintain cognitive abilities well, with wisdom and expertise compensating for any subtle decline in processing speed. Late adulthood, 65 plus, involves retirement, changing relationships, and continued development. Physical decline accelerates, reduced strength, stamina, sensory acuity, and increased risk of chronic illness. Cognitive changes vary widely. While processing speed, working memory, and fluid intelligence decline, crystallized intelligence and vocabulary often remain stable or even improve. Dementia, including Alzheimer's disease, affects a significant minority of older adults, involving progressive cognitive decline. But most older adults remain cognitively capable, and many report high life satisfaction. A successful aging. What promotes thriving in later life? Physical health, social connections, sense of purpose, continued learning, and engagement contribute to successful aging. Staying physically active, maintaining social relationships, pursuing meaningful activities, and remaining mentally stimulated all support well-being. Perspective matters too. Older adults tend to focus on positive experiences and regulate emotions effectively, a phenomenon called the positivity effect. They prioritize meaningful relationships and experiences, perhaps recognizing time's limits. Many older adults report that these years are among their happiest, marked by wisdom, acceptance, and gratitude. Human development is a lifelong process. We continue growing, changing, and adapting from conception until death. Each stage presents challenges and opportunities. Understanding development helps us support children, navigate our own lives, and approach aging with hope and preparation. Motivation, emotion, and personality. What motivates us? Motivation refers to the forces that initiate, direct, and sustain behavior toward goals. Why do we eat, seek relationships, pursue achievement, explore our world? Various theories offer perspectives. Drive reduction theory, proposed by Clark Hull, suggests that biological needs create aroused tension states, drives, that motivate us to restore balance, homeostasis. When you're hungry, a drive to eat is activated. Eating reduces the drive, restoring equilibrium. This explains biological motives well, but struggles with behaviors that increase rather than reduce arousal. Arousal theory suggests we're motivated to maintain optimal levels of arousal. Too little arousal and we seek stimulation. We're bored, so we seek novelty, challenge, excitement. Too much arousal and we seek calm. This explains why we sometimes take risks or seek thrills not tied to biological needs. Incentive theory emphasizes external stimuli that pull us toward goals. We're drawn to rewards, attracted by incentives, money, praise, success, pleasure. This complements drive theories, drives push, incentives pull. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow proposed that human needs arrange themselves in a hierarchy. Lower-level needs must be substantially satisfied before higher needs become motivating. At the base are physiological needs: food, water, sleep, warmth. Without these, survival is impossible. Next comes safety needs: security, stability, protection from harm. Once these are met, belongingness and love needs emerge: connection, intimacy, acceptance by others. Then esteem needs: achievement, recognition, respect, confidence. At the top is self-actualization, realizing one's full potential, creativity, meaning, transcendence. Maslow described self-actualized people as accepting, authentic, creative, spontaneous, and concerned with humanity. While the strict hierarchy has been questioned, people sometimes pursue higher needs even when lower ones aren't fully met. The model usefully highlights that human motivation extends beyond survival to include growth, meaning, and transcendence. Self-determination theory. Edward Desai and Richard Ryan's self-determination theory emphasizes three fundamental psychological needs: competence, feeling effective; autonomy, feeling in control of one's actions; and relatedness, feeling connected to others. When these needs are satisfied, intrinsic motivation flourishes, engaging in activities for inherent satisfaction rather than external rewards. Intrinsic motivation produces deeper engagement, better learning, and greater well-being than extrinsic motivation. Paradoxically, offering external rewards for intrinsically motivated activities can undermine intrinsic motivation, the over-justification effect. If you enjoy painting and start getting paid for it, you might begin painting for money rather than joy, and enjoyment may decrease. Supporting autonomy, providing optimal challenges, and fostering connection enhances motivation more effectively than controlling, pressuring, or isolating people. Hunger, a complex motive. Even a seemingly simple biological motive like hunger involves complex interactions of physiology, psychology, and culture. The hypothalamus plays a key role, with the lateral hypothalamus triggering hunger and the ventromedial hypothalamus signaling satiety. Blood glucose levels, hormones like ghrelin, stimulates appetite, and leptin signals satiety. Stomach distension and sensory cues all contribute to hunger and satiety. But psychological and social factors matter enormously. We eat when we're not hungry, out of habit, social pressure, emotional comfort. We diet when we are hungry, overriding biological signals. Cultural norms dictate what, when, and how much we eat. Eating disorders like anorexia nervosa, self-starvation, bulimia nervosa, binge eating followed by purging, and binge eating disorder reflect disturbances in biological, psychological, and cultural factors intersecting in damaging ways. Theories of emotion. Emotion involves physiological arousal, expressive behaviors, and conscious experience. But what causes what? Several theories offer different accounts. The James-Lange theory, proposed independently by William James and Carl Lange, suggests that physiological arousal comes first, and our experience of emotion follows from our perception of bodily changes. We see a bear, we run, our heart races, we breathe rapidly, and from perceiving these bodily changes, we feel fear. We're afraid because we run, not we run because we're afraid. The Cannon-Bard theory, proposed by Walter Cannon and Philip Bard, challenged this, arguing that physiological arousal and emotional experience occur simultaneously but independently. The thalamus sends signals simultaneously to the cortex, producing emotional experience, and the autonomic nervous system, producing arousal. Both happen together, neither causing the other. Stanley Schachter and Jerome Singer's two-factor theory proposes that emotion requires both physiological arousal and a cognitive label. Arousal alone is ambiguous. It could be fear, anger, excitement. We interpret arousal based on context, attributing it to an appropriate emotion. In their famous study, participants injected with adrenaline interpreted their arousal as euphoria or anger depending on a confederate's behavior in the room. Same arousal, different emotions, based on cognitive appraisal. Modern neuroscience suggests emotion involves complex interactions between subcortical regions like the amygdala, fast, automatic emotional responses, and cortical regions like the prefrontal cortex, conscious interpretation and regulation. Different emotions have somewhat distinct neural signatures, though there's substantial overlap. Basic emotions and emotional expression. Paul Ekman identified 6 basic emotions recognized across cultures: happiness, sadness, anger, fear, surprise, and disgust. Facial expressions of these emotions appear universal, suggesting evolutionary origins. Even people born blind show similar expressions, indicating they're not learned through observation. The facial feedback hypothesis suggests that facial expressions influence emotional experience. Smile and you may feel happier. Frown and you may feel sadder. Botox, which paralyses facial muscles, has been shown in some studies to dampen emotional experience, supporting this idea. Emotions serve functions. Fear mobilizes us to escape danger. Anger prepares us to overcome obstacles. Disgust protects us from contamination. Sadness signals loss and elicits support from others. Joy rewards behaviors that promote well-being. Emotional regulation. Emotional regulation involves influencing which emotions we have, when we have them, and how we experience and express them. Strategies include situation selection, avoiding situations that trigger unwanted emotions, situation modification, changing the situation, attentional deployment, redirecting attention, cognitive reappraisal, reinterpreting the meaning of the situation, and response modulation, influencing emotional responses after they've been triggered. Reappraisal, changing how you think about a situation, is generally more effective and healthier than suppression, inhibiting emotional expression. Suppression doesn't reduce emotional experience and can actually increase physiological arousal and impair memory and relationships. Effective emotional regulation contributes to mental health, relationships, and success. Emotional dysregulation is implicated in many psychological disorders. Personality, enduring patterns. Personality consists of characteristic patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior that distinguish individuals and persist over time and situations. What makes you, you? Several theoretical perspectives offer insights. Psychodynamic theory. Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory, the original psychodynamic approach, emphasized unconscious processes, early childhood experiences, and psychosexual development. Freud proposed that personality has three structures: the id, primitive, unconscious urges seeking immediate gratification; the superego, internalized moral standards and ideals; and the ego, the conscious self that mediates between id, superego, and reality. Conflicts between these structures create anxiety, which the ego manages through defense mechanisms, unconscious strategies like repression, pushing threatening thoughts out of awareness; projection, attributing one's own unacceptable thoughts to others; rationalization, creating acceptable explanations for questionable behavior; and sublimation, channeling unacceptable impulses into socially acceptable activities. Freud proposed psychosexual stages: oral, anal, phallic, latency, genital, suggesting that personality forms through resolution of conflicts at each stage. Fixation at a stage due to unresolved conflicts shapes adult personality. While Freud's specific claims are largely unsupported, his insights about unconscious influence, childhood's importance, and psychological defenses remain influential. Neo-Freudians like Carl Jung, Alfred Adler, and Karen Horney modified his theories, emphasizing social factors, ego processes, and lifespan development. A humanistic theory. Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow emphasized the whole person, subjective experience, free will, and growth potential. Rogers proposed that personality develops through the interaction of the self-concept, beliefs about oneself, and experiences. When experiences match self-concept, we achieve congruence and psychological health. When there's incongruence, anxiety and defensive distortion result. Rogers emphasized unconditional positive regard, acceptance without judgment, as essential for healthy development. Conditions of worth, feeling valued only when meeting others' standards, create conditional self-regard and incongruence. The actualizing tendency, an innate drive toward growth and fulfilling potential, motivates behavior. Given supportive conditions, people naturally move toward wholeness and self-actualization. Humanistic theories have been criticized for being difficult to test scientifically and perhaps naively optimistic. But they brought attention to positive aspects of human nature, personal growth, and the subjective experience of being human. A trait theory. Trait theories describe personality in terms of stable characteristics, traits that influence behavior across situations. Gordon Allport identified thousands of trait words. Raymond Cattell used factor analysis to reduce these to 16 fundamental traits. Hans Eysenck proposed 3 broad dimensions: extroversion-introversion, neuroticism stability, and psychoticism. The 5-factor model, or Big Five, has become the dominant trait model. It identifies 5 broad dimensions that capture most personality variation: openness to experience, imagination, curiosity, creativity, willingness to try new things versus conventional, practical; conscientiousness, organized, responsible, self-disciplined, goal-oriented versus careless, impulsive, disorganized; extroversion, outgoing, energetic, sociable, assertive versus reserved, quiet, solitary; agreeableness, compassionate, cooperative, trusting, helpful versus competitive, suspicious, antagonistic; neuroticism, anxious, emotionally unstable, prone to negative emotions versus calm, emotionally stable, resilient. These traits show moderate heritability, about 40–50%, are relatively stable across adulthood, and predict important life outcomes. Conscientiousness predicts academic and job success. Extroversion and agreeableness predict relationship quality. Neuroticism predicts risk for anxiety and depression. Trait theories describe personality well, but don't explain how traits develop or why people sometimes act inconsistently with their traits. Behavior reflects both traits and situations. Social cognitive theory. Albert Bandura's social cognitive theory emphasizes reciprocal determinism. Personality is shaped by interactions among personal factors, thoughts, feelings, beliefs, behavior, and environment. Each influences the others continuously. People aren't passive victims of environment or slaves to unconscious urges. We think, interpret, choose, and regulate our own behavior. Self-efficacy, belief in one's ability to succeed in specific situations, influences which activities we pursue, how much effort we exert, and how we respond to challenges. High self-efficacy promotes achievement and resilience. Locus of control refers to beliefs about control over life events. Internal locus of control, believing you control your outcomes through your actions, promotes motivation and achievement. External locus of control, believing outcomes are determined by luck, fate, or others, can lead to passivity and helplessness. Social cognitive theory integrates traits, cognition, learning, and environment, offering a comprehensive, scientifically grounded perspective on personality. Personality assessment. Personality is assessed through various methods. Self-report inventories like the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, MMPI, or the NEO Personality Inventory ask people to describe themselves through questionnaires. These are efficient and objective, but rely on self-awareness and honesty. Projective tests like the Rorschach Inkblot test or thematic apperception test, TAT, present ambiguous stimuli and ask people to interpret them, with responses assumed to reveal unconscious thoughts and feelings. These are intriguing but have questionable reliability and validity. Behavioral observations, interviews, and life history data supplement questionnaires and projective tests, providing richer, more contextual information. No single method is perfect. Comprehensive assessment combines multiple approaches, recognizing that personality is complex, multifaceted, and context-dependent. Social psychology. How others influence us. Social psychology studies how thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are influenced by the actual, imagined, or implied presence of others. We are social creatures, and much of what we think and do reflects social influence. Attribution, explaining behavior. We constantly try to explain behavior, our own and others. Attribution theory examines how we infer causes of behavior. We make dispositional attributions, explaining behavior by internal characteristics, personality, attitudes, motives, or situational attributions, explaining behavior by external circumstances. The fundamental attribution error is our tendency to overestimate dispositional factors and underestimate situational factors when explaining others' behavior. If someone cuts you off in traffic, you think, "What a jerk." Dispositional, not maybe they're rushing to the hospital, situational. Yet when explaining our own behavior, we often favor situational attributions, the actor-observer bias. The self-serving bias leads us to attribute our successes to internal factors. I'm smart, hardworking, and failures to external factors. The test was unfair, I was unlucky. This protects self-esteem but can prevent learning from mistakes. Attitudes and persuasion. Attitudes are evaluations of objects, people, or ideas. They influence behavior, though not always consistently. The theory of planned behavior suggests that attitudes, plus subjective norms, perceived social pressure, and perceived behavioral control belief in one's ability to perform the behavior, predict behavioral intentions, which in turn predict behavior. Attitudes can form through direct experience, social learning, or cognitive evaluation. They can also change through persuasion, deliberate attempts to change attitudes through communication. Persuasion depends on several factors. Source credibility and attractiveness increase persuasiveness. Messages that present both sides and address counterarguments are more persuasive to skeptical audiences. Emotional appeals can be powerful, especially when combined with logical arguments. The peripheral route to persuasion relies on superficial cues, speaker attractiveness, number of arguments, while the central route involves careful processing of message content. The central route produces more enduring attitude change. Cognitive dissonance theory, proposed by Leon Festinger, suggests that we experience uncomfortable tension when we hold contradictory attitudes or when our behavior conflicts with our attitudes. To reduce dissonance, we change attitudes or behavior or add justifying cognitions. If you smoke despite knowing it's unhealthy, you might quit, change behavior, minimize health risks, change attitude, or emphasize stress relief benefits, add justifications. Conformity and obedience. Solomon Asch's line judgment studies demonstrated powerful conformity pressure. Participants judged which of 3 comparison lines matched a standard line, an easy task. But when Confederates unanimously gave wrong answers, about 75% of participants conformed at least once, giving obviously incorrect answers. Some genuinely doubted their perception. Others knew the answer was wrong, but conformed to avoid standing out. Conformity increases with group size, up to a point. Unanimity, even one dissenter, dramatically reduces conformity, group cohesiveness, and public responses. Conformity isn't always bad. It enables social coordination and can reflect valid information from others. But mindless conformity can lead to harmful outcomes. Stanley Milgram's obedience studies revealed disturbing willingness to harm others when ordered by authority. Participants believed they were delivering increasingly intense electric shocks to a learner, actually a Confederate who wasn't really shocked, in a study on punishment and learning. Despite the learner's screams and pleas, about 65% of participants delivered the maximum shock, labeled XXX danger, severe shock, when the experimenter insisted. Factors increasing obedience included physical proximity to authority, distance from the victim, prestigious setting, and the authority figure assuming responsibility. These studies reveal how ordinary people can commit harmful acts under social pressure, with profound implications for understanding atrocities, war crimes, and everyday complicity in harmful systems. Group dynamics. Groups influence individual behavior in various ways. Social facilitation occurs when performance on simple or well-learned tasks improves in others' presence, while performance on complex or new tasks worsens. Social loafing occurs when individuals exert less effort in groups than when working alone, since individual contributions are less identifiable. Deindividuation, loss of self-awareness and individual accountability in groups, can lead to impulsive, deviant, or aggressive behavior. This helps explain crowd behavior, online disinhibition, and mob violence. Group polarization describes how group discussion tends to strengthen members' initial inclinations. If members lean toward risk before discussion, they'll lean even more toward risk after. If they lean toward caution, discussion intensifies caution. Groupthink occurs when desire for harmony in cohesive groups overrides realistic appraisal of alternatives, leading to poor decisions. Symptoms include illusion of invulnerability, collective rationalization, belief in groups' morality, stereotyping of outgroups, pressure on dissenters, self-censorship, and illusion of unanimity. Prejudice and stereotyping. Prejudice is an unjustifiable negative attitude toward a group and its members. Stereotypes are generalized beliefs about group members. Discrimination is unjustifiable negative behavior toward group members. Prejudice can stem from social inequalities, justifying existing hierarchies, social divisions, us versus them, and emotional scapegoating, blaming outgroups for frustrations. In-group bias, favoring one's own group and outgroup homogeneity, perceiving outgroup members as more similar than they are, contribute to prejudice. Cognitive roots of prejudice include categorization, creating mental categories, which simplifies social perception but leads to stereotyping. Confirmation bias maintains stereotypes by leading us to notice and remember stereotype-consistent information. Stereotypes can become self-fulfilling prophecies when expectations influence behavior, which elicits confirmation of expectations. Reducing prejudice requires equal status contact in pursuit of common goals with institutional support, known as the contact hypothesis. Perspective-taking, counter-stereotypic examples, and cooperative interdependence also help. Aggression. Aggression is physical or verbal behavior intended to harm. Biological factors include genetics, neural systems, amygdala, prefrontal cortex, neurotransmitters, low serotonin associated with aggression, and hormones testosterone correlates with, though doesn't simply cause, aggression. Psychological factors include frustration. The frustration-aggression principle suggests that frustration breeds aggression, social learning, observing and imitating aggressive models, and cognitive factors, hostile attributional bias, interpreting ambiguous actions as hostile. Situational factors include aversive events, pain, heat, crowding, alcohol, which impairs judgment and self-control, and media violence. Exposure to violent media increases aggressive thoughts and behaviors, especially in vulnerable individuals, though effect sizes are debated. Altruism and prosocial behavior. Altruism is unselfish regard for the welfare of others. Why do people help? Social exchange theory suggests we help when benefits outweigh costs. Social norms like the reciprocity norm, help those who help you, and social responsibility norm, help those in need, promote helping. Evolutionary psychology suggests altruism toward kin selection, and reciprocal altruism toward non-kin. Helping those likely to return the favor evolved because they increased reproductive success of genes promoting these behaviors. The bystander effect describes decreased likelihood of helping when others are present. Diffusion of responsibility, assuming someone else will help, and pluralistic ignorance, interpreting others' inaction as indicating no emergency, contribute to this effect. The tragic murder of Kitty Genovese, witnessed by multiple bystanders who didn't intervene, sparked research on this phenomenon. To increase helping, notice the event, interpret it as an emergency, assume responsibility, know what to do, and decide to act. In emergencies, combat the bystander effect by directly asking specific individuals for help. Attraction and relationships. What draws us to some people and not others? Proximity, being near someone geographically, increases liking through mere exposure, familiarity increases liking, and providing opportunity for interaction. Physical attractiveness influences initial attraction powerfully, though its importance decreases in established relationships. We prefer people similar to ourselves in attitudes, values, interests, and backgrounds. Complementarity, opposites attract, has less support than similarity. Reciprocal liking, knowing someone likes us, increases our liking of them. Self-disclosure, revealing intimate thoughts and feelings, deepens relationships, especially when reciprocal. Passionate love, intense, arousing, emotional, characterizes early relationships. Companionate love, deep, affectionate attachment, characterizes enduring relationships. Robert Sternberg's triangular theory proposes that love has three components: intimacy, closeness, connection; passion, physical attraction, romance; and commitment, decision to maintain the relationship. Different combinations create different types of love. Equity, both partners feeling they receive benefits proportional to contributions; and secure attachment styles predict relationship satisfaction and longevity. Positive illusions, slightly idealized views of partners, also predict satisfaction, provided they're not wildly unrealistic. Mental health, disorders, and therapies. Understanding stress. Life inevitably includes stress, physical and psychological responses to challenging or threatening events. Richard Lazarus distinguished between primary appraisal, is this event threatening? And secondary appraisal, do I have resources to cope? Events appraised as threatening and beyond our coping resources create the most stress. Stress can be acute, brief, intense, or chronic, ongoing. Chronic stress is particularly harmful. The body's stress response, coordinated by the sympathetic nervous system and the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal (HPA) axis, mobilizes energy and resources. In the short term, this is adaptive, helping us deal with threats. But chronic activation impairs health. Prolonged stress suppresses immune function, increases inflammation, elevates blood pressure, disrupts sleep, and contributes to cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, depression, and cognitive decline. Managing stress is essential for health. Coping with stress. Coping strategies can be problem-focused, tackling the problem directly, or emotion-focused, managing emotional reactions. Problem-focused coping is generally more effective when situations are controllable. Emotion-focused coping helps when situations aren't controllable. Adaptive coping strategies include exercise, reduces stress hormones, improves mood; relaxation techniques, deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, meditation, social support, connection buffers stress, time management, cognitive reappraisal, and seeking professional help when needed. Maladaptive strategies include denial, rumination, repetitively thinking about problems without taking action, substance use, and avoidance. These may provide temporary relief but worsen problems long-term. Resilience, the ability to adapt well to adversity, varies among individuals. Factors promoting resilience include optimism, sense of control, social support, coping skills, and finding meaning in adversity. What are psychological disorders? Psychological disorders, or mental illnesses, are patterns of thoughts, feelings, or behaviors that cause significant distress or impairment. They represent deviations from cultural norms, though this definition is fraught with complexity. Who defines normal? Not all culturally deviant behavior is disordered, and some disorders are defined by subjective distress rather than deviance. Current diagnostic systems, including the DSM-5, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, in the United States, and the ICD, International Classification of Diseases, globally define specific criteria for diagnosing various disorders. These systems aim for reliability, consistent diagnosis across clinicians, and validity, accurate identification of meaningful conditions. Diagnosis serves important functions, facilitating communication among professionals, guiding treatment, enabling research, and validating individuals' experiences. But diagnosis also has limitations and risks. Labels can stigmatize, reducing people to categories. Disorders exist on continua, not in discrete categories. Comorbidity, multiple co-occurring disorders, is common, and cultural factors influence how distress manifests and is interpreted. The biopsychosocial model. Understanding psychological disorders requires the biopsychosocial model, which integrates biological, psychological, and social-cultural factors. Disorders typically arise from interactions among genetic vulnerabilities, brain processes, cognitive patterns, early experiences, current stressors, and cultural contexts. No single factor causes most disorders. This integrative perspective guides both understanding and treatment, suggesting that effective interventions may target biological, psychological, or social factors, or ideally, multiple levels simultaneously. Anxiety disorders. Anxiety disorders involve excessive fear and worry that impair functioning. Generalized anxiety disorder involves persistent, excessive worry about multiple domains. Panic disorder involves recurrent, unexpected panic attacks, sudden intense fear with physical symptoms like racing heart, shortness of breath, dizziness, and feelings of unreality or impending doom. Phobias are intense, irrational fears of specific objects or situations. Social anxiety disorder involves intense fear of social or performance situations due to fear of embarrassment or judgment. Agoraphobia is fear of situations where escape might be difficult if panic symptoms occur. Biological factors include genetic predisposition, overactive amygdala, and altered neurotransmitter systems. Psychological factors include conditioning, learning to fear previously neutral stimuli, cognitive biases, attention to threat, catastrophic interpretations, and learned helplessness. Social factors include stressful life events and traumatic experiences. Depressive and bipolar disorders. Major depressive disorder involves persistent sadness, loss of interest or pleasure, changes in sleep and appetite, fatigue, feelings of worthlessness or guilt, difficulty concentrating, and sometimes suicidal thoughts. It's not just ordinary sadness, but a pervasive, impairing condition lasting at least 2 weeks. Persistent depressive disorder, dysthymia, involves less severe but chronic depression lasting at least 2 years. Bipolar disorder involves mood swings between depressive episodes and manic or hypomanic episodes. Mania involves elevated or irritable mood, increased energy, decreased need for sleep, racing thoughts, grandiosity, impulsivity, and risky behavior. Hypomania is less severe mania. Biological factors include genetic vulnerability, heritability around 40–50% for depression, higher for bipolar, neurotransmitter imbalances, serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, hormonal factors, and brain structure differences. Psychological factors include negative cognitive patterns, pessimistic thinking, attributional style blaming oneself for failures and external factors for successes, rumination, and stress. Social factors include trauma, loss, chronic stress, and lack of social support. Schizophrenia spectrum disorders. Schizophrenia is a severe disorder involving distortions of thought, perception, and behavior. Positive symptoms are excesses or distortions. Hallucinations, perceiving things not present, usually auditory. Delusions, false beliefs resistant to contradictory evidence, such as paranoid, grandiose, or referential delusions, and disorganized speech and behavior. Negative symptoms are deficits. Flat affect, reduced emotional expression, alogia, reduced speech, avolition, lack of motivation and goal-directed behavior, and social withdrawal. Cognitive symptoms include impaired attention, working memory, and executive functions. Schizophrenia has strong biological bases, high heritability, around 80%, brain structure abnormalities, enlarged ventricles, reduced gray matter, excess dopamine activity in certain brain regions, and prenatal and perinatal complications. Psychological and social factors like stress and family communication patterns can influence course and symptoms but aren't primary causes. Obsessive-compulsive and related disorders. Obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, involves obsessions, intrusive, unwanted thoughts, images, or urges causing anxiety, and/or compulsions, repetitive behaviors, or mental acts performed to reduce anxiety. Common obsessions include contamination fears, fears of harming others, need for symmetry. Common compulsions include washing, checking, counting, arranging. OCD involves abnormalities in brain circuits connecting the orbitofrontal cortex, striatum, and thalamus, and responds to medications affecting serotonin and to specific therapies. Body dysmorphic disorder involves preoccupation with perceived flaws in appearance. Hoarding disorder involves difficulty discarding possessions, regardless of value, leading to cluttered living spaces. Trauma and stressor-related disorders. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, can develop after exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. Symptoms include intrusive memories or flashbacks, avoidance of reminders, negative alterations in cognitions and mood, and hyperarousal, irritability, hypervigilance, exaggerated startle, sleep disturbance. Not everyone exposed to trauma develops PTSD. Risk factors include trauma severity, prior trauma, lack of social support, and genetic vulnerability. PTSD involves alterations in brain regions involved in fear and memory, including the amygdala, hippocampus, and prefrontal cortex. Acute stress disorder is similar, but occurs within 1 month of trauma and lasts up to 1 month. Adjustment disorders involve emotional or behavioral symptoms in response to identifiable stressors. Personality disorders. Personality disorders involve enduring, inflexible patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving that deviate from cultural expectations and cause distress or impairment. They're organized into 3 clusters. Cluster A, odd eccentric, paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal personality disorders. Cluster B, dramatic emotional erratic, antisocial, borderline, histrionic, and narcissistic personality disorders. Cluster C, anxious fearful, avoidant, dependent, and obsessive-compulsive personality disorders. Borderline personality disorder, characterized by instability in relationships, self-image, emotions, and impulsivity, often involves intense fears of abandonment, self-harm, and chronic feelings of emptiness. It responds to specific therapies like dialectical behavior therapy. Antisocial personality disorder involves disregard for others' rights, lack of remorse, impulsivity, and often deceitfulness and aggression. It's more common in males and associated with childhood conduct disorder. Personality disorders are controversial. Critics argue categories lack clear boundaries, stigmatize, and may pathologize cultural or individual differences. Dimensional models viewing personality traits on continua may be more valid than categorical diagnoses. Therapeutic approaches. Psychotherapy involves systematic psychological methods to help people overcome distress and develop healthier patterns. Numerous approaches exist. Psychoanalytic and psychodynamic therapies. Freud's psychoanalysis aims to bring unconscious conflicts into awareness. Techniques include free association, saying whatever comes to mind, dream analysis, and interpretation of resistance and transference, projecting feelings about important figures onto the therapist. Modern psychodynamic therapies are briefer and less intensive, focusing on relationships, emotions, and unconscious patterns, but incorporating insights from attachment theory and contemporary research. Humanistic therapies. Carl Rogers' person-centered therapy, client-centered therapy, provides a supportive environment where clients explore feelings and work towards self-understanding and growth. The therapist offers empathy, unconditional positive regard, and genuineness, trusting the client's capacity for self-direction. Behavioral therapies. Behavioral therapies apply learning principles to change maladaptive behaviors. Exposure therapy treats anxiety by gradually exposing clients to feared situations in a safe context, allowing extinction of fear responses. Systematic desensitization pairs relaxation with gradual exposure. Applied behavior analysis uses reinforcement and punishment to shape behavior. Aversion therapy pairs undesired behavior with unpleasant stimuli. Cognitive and cognitive behavioral therapies. Aaron Beck's cognitive therapy and Albert Ellis's rational emotive behavior therapy address dysfunctional thoughts that contribute to emotional and behavioral problems. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, combines cognitive and behavioral techniques. CBT helps clients identify negative automatic thoughts, examine evidence for and against them, develop more balanced thoughts, and practice new behaviors. CBT is empirically supported for anxiety, depression, PTSD, OCD, eating disorders, and other conditions. Dialectical behavior therapy. DBT, developed by Marcia Linehan for borderline personality disorder, combines CBT with mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness skills. It balances acceptance and change. Mindfulness-based therapies. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, teach mindfulness meditation to reduce stress, prevent depressive relapse, and enhance well-being. Acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, uses mindfulness and values-based action. Biomedical therapies. Psychopharmacology treats disorders with medications. Antidepressants, SSRIs, SNRIs, others increase serotonin and/or norepinephrine. Anti-anxiety medications, benzodiazepines, buspirone, reduce anxiety but carry risks. Mood stabilizers, lithium, anticonvulsants, treat bipolar disorder. Antipsychotics reduce psychotic symptoms in schizophrenia and other disorders. Medications can be highly effective, especially combined with psychotherapy. But they have side effects, don't work for everyone, and often treat symptoms rather than underlying causes. Electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, involving brief electrical stimulation of the brain under anesthesia, is effective for severe depression unresponsive to other treatments. Transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, uses magnetic pulses to stimulate brain regions, treating depression with fewer side effects. Positive psychology and well-being. Martin Seligman founded positive psychology, shifting focus from dysfunction to flourishing. Positive psychology studies strengths, virtues, and conditions enabling individuals and communities to thrive. Research identifies factors promoting well-being, positive emotions, engagement flow states, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. Seligman's PERMA model. Gratitude, optimism, mindfulness, character strengths, acts of kindness, social connection, and purpose all enhance well-being. Positive interventions, gratitude journals, acts of kindness, savoring positive experiences, using signature strengths, can increase happiness and reduce depression. Resilience, post-traumatic growth, and flourishing are possible even after adversity. Psychology isn't just about reducing suffering, but also about building lives worth living. Emerging directions in mental health. Cultural competence in therapy recognizes that culture shapes how distress manifests and is understood. Therapies must be adapted to be relevant and effective across cultures. Trauma-informed care recognizes that trauma is widespread, affects functioning in multiple ways, and that services should promote safety, trust, collaboration, and empowerment while avoiding re-traumatization. Psychedelic-assisted therapy, using substances like psilocybin or MDMA combined with psychotherapy, shows promise for treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, and existential distress, though it remains largely experimental and illegal in most places. Digital mental health interventions, apps, online therapy, computerized CBT increase access and convenience, though questions about effectiveness and therapeutic relationship remain. Recovery-oriented care emphasizes hope, empowerment, and living a meaningful life even with ongoing symptoms, rather than focusing solely on symptom reduction. Mental health is essential to overall health and well-being. Understanding, compassion, and effective treatment can transform lives. Advanced and emerging topics. Evolutionary psychology, the adapted mind. Evolutionary psychology applies principles of natural selection to understand psychological traits. The mind, like the body, evolved to solve problems our ancestors faced over millions of years. Psychological mechanisms that enhanced survival and reproduction were favored by selection. This perspective explains universal human tendencies. We fear snakes and spiders more readily than cars or guns because our ancestors faced dangers from reptiles and insects, not modern technology. We find sweet and fatty foods irresistibly attractive because calories were scarce for most of human history. We form bonds with kin and reciprocate favors because these strategies enhanced survival. Evolutionary psychology illuminates mating preferences, men on average valuing youth and fertility cues, women on average valuing resources and status. Parental investment, women typically investing more in offspring, influencing mating strategies, cooperation and altruism, aggression, and more. Critics caution against just-so stories, untestable speculations about evolutionary origins, and genetic determinism, ignoring flexibility and cultural influence. Evolutionary psychology is most valuable when combined with neuroscience, genetics, anthropology, and careful empirical testing. Neuropsychology, brain and behavior connections. Neuropsychology studies relationships between brain function and behavior, combining neuroscience and psychology. Brain imaging, fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, PET, positron emission tomography, EEG electroencephalography, allows researchers to observe brain activity during cognitive and emotional tasks. These technologies reveal which brain regions activate during different processes, how networks coordinate, and how brains differ between individuals or across development. They've advanced understanding of memory, emotion, decision-making, consciousness, and disorders. Neuroplasticity research shows that experience shapes brain structure throughout life. Meditation increases cortical thickness in attention and emotion regulation regions. Learning to juggle increases gray matter in visual motor areas. Even in adulthood, the brain can rewire itself, offering hope for recovery from injury and potential for growth. Applications include cognitive rehabilitation after brain injury, neurofeedback, training people to alter brain activity, brain-computer interfaces allowing paralyzed individuals to communicate or control prosthetic limbs, and understanding neurological and psychiatric disorders. Cultural psychology. Context shapes mind. Culture profoundly shapes how we think, feel, and behave. Cultural psychology examines these influences, moving beyond treating Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, weird populations as universal defaults. Individualistic cultures, like the United States, emphasize independence, personal achievement, and uniqueness. Collectivistic cultures, like many Asian, African, and Latin American societies, emphasize interdependence, group harmony, and conformity to social roles. These values shape self-concept, motivation, emotion, relationships, and cognition. For example, East Asians tend toward holistic, context-dependent thinking, noticing relationships and backgrounds. Westerners tend toward analytic thinking, focusing on objects and attributes independent of context. These are average tendencies, not absolute differences, but they demonstrate culture's profound influence on basic cognitive processes. Emotion expression, regulation, and even which emotions are valued vary across cultures. Mental disorders manifest differently. Depression in some cultures involves physical symptoms more than emotional ones. Therapies must be culturally adapted to be effective. Cultural psychology challenges the assumption that psychological principles are universal, revealing both universal patterns rooted in shared biology and evolutionary history, and cultural particularities rooted in different ecologies, economies, histories, and values. Positive psychology in depth. Beyond treating disorder, positive psychology asks, what makes life fulfilling? What enables human flourishing? Character strengths and virtues, wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, transcendence, represent valued human qualities across cultures. Using signature strengths in daily life enhances well-being. Flow, described by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, is complete absorption in challenging activities matching one's skills. Flow produces enjoyment, timelessness, and intrinsic motivation. Designing work and leisure to promote flow enhances quality of life. Gratitude interventions, keeping gratitude journals, writing thank you letters, reliably increase happiness. Savoring positive experiences, mindfulness, acts of kindness, nurturing relationships, pursuing meaning, and physical exercise all enhance well-being. Meaning in life comes from belonging to something larger than oneself, pursuing valued goals, making sense of experience, and feeling one's life matters. Meaning predicts resilience, health, and longevity. Post-traumatic growth describes positive psychological change following adversity. Many trauma survivors report increased appreciation for life, closer relationships, greater personal strength, recognition of new possibilities, and spiritual development. Positive psychology isn't about denying problems or forcing happiness, but about building resources that help people navigate challenges and live fully. Psychology of technology and AI. As technology pervades life, psychologists study its effects. Social media affects self-esteem, social comparison, attention, and relationships. Excessive use predicts anxiety and depression, though direction of causation is debated. Curated online personas create unrealistic comparisons. Instant connectivity paradoxically sometimes increases loneliness. Yet technology also enables connection across distances, provides communities for marginalized groups, and facilitates activism and learning. Video games can impair functioning when excessive, but also improve spatial cognition, attention, and problem-solving. Virtual reality offers therapeutic applications, exposure therapy for phobias, PTSD treatment, pain management, skills training. Human-AI interaction raises questions. As AI becomes more sophisticated, how does interacting with AI agents affect social skills, trust, employment, creativity? Algorithmic decision-making in hiring, criminal justice, and healthcare raises fairness and bias concerns. Psychologists contribute to designing technology promoting well-being, preventing harms like addiction or manipulation, and ensuring AI development respects human values and dignity. Future directions. Neuroethics grapples with ethical implications of neuroscience. Cognitive enhancement, brain privacy, responsibility, and free will in light of neuroscience findings. Precision medicine tailors treatments to individual genetic, biological, and environmental profiles, moving beyond one-size-fits-all approaches. Global mental health addresses the vast unmet need for mental health care worldwide, adapting interventions for diverse, resource-limited settings. Understanding consciousness remains psychology's hardest problem. How does subjective experience arise from neural activity? Integration of neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, and artificial intelligence may inch toward answers. Climate psychology examines psychological dimensions of environmental crisis. Eco-anxiety, behavior change, environmental identity, collective action. Psychology continues evolving, integrating new technologies, expanding cultural inclusivity, addressing global challenges, and deepening understanding of human nature. Conclusion and integration. And so we arrive, gently, at the end of this journey through the vast landscape of psychology. Let your breathing remain soft and steady. Let your body rest fully. There is nothing more you need to do. Just listen. Just allow these final reflections to settle into your awareness like leaves drifting down to rest on still water. We have traveled far together. From the very beginnings of psychology as a science, through the discoveries of Wundt and James, Freud and Skinner, Piaget and Rogers, to the cutting edges of neuroscience, cultural psychology, and the study of human flourishing. We've explored the brain, that 3-pound universe within your skull, with its billions of neurons firing in patterns that create everything you think, feel, remember, and experience. We've seen how neurotransmitters carry messages, how the amygdala guards you against threats, how the prefrontal cortex allows you to plan and choose, how neuroplasticity means your brain continues growing and changing throughout life. We've understood how you sense the world, light becoming sight, vibrations becoming sound, chemicals becoming taste and smell, and how perception actively constructs meaning from sensation. We've explored consciousness in its many forms, waking, sleeping, dreaming, meditating, each state revealing different aspects of mind. We've learned how you learn, through classical conditioning, operant conditioning, observation, and how memories form, store, and sometimes fail or distort. We've examined thinking, problem-solving, intelligence in its many forms, and the remarkable human capacity for language. We've witnessed development across the lifespan, from the first moments after conception through infancy, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and aging. Each stage bringing growth, challenges, and possibilities. We've explored what motivates us, what we feel, and the enduring patterns of personality that make each person unique. We've seen how profoundly we are shaped by others, how we attribute, persuade, conform, help, love, and sometimes harm. We've understood mental health challenges with compassion and learned about therapies that heal and promote growth. And we've glimpsed the frontiers. Evolutionary perspectives on mind, brain imaging revealing thoughts in action, cultural shaping of psychology, positive psychology's science of well-being, and the psychological implications of our technological age. All of these concepts, all of this knowledge, connects. Your brain creates your consciousness. Your consciousness includes sensations, perceptions, memories, thoughts, emotions. Your development unfolds through biological maturation interacting with learning and experience. Your personality emerges from genes, brain, experiences, and culture. You exist always in social contexts that shape and are shaped by you, and your mental health reflects the intricate interplay of all these factors. Psychology reveals that you are a biological organism, and also a thinking, feeling, meaning-making being. You are shaped by evolution and also by culture. You have unconscious processes and also conscious choice. You are similar to all humans in fundamental ways and also wonderfully unique. Understanding psychology helps you understand yourself and others with greater depth and compassion. It reveals why you feel what you feel, why people behave as they do, how to learn and remember more effectively, how to nurture healthy relationships, how to cope with stress, how to recognize when you or others need help, and how to live more fully. As you drift now, perhaps toward sleep, perhaps toward dreams, perhaps simply into deeper relaxation, allow these understandings to integrate within you. Your conscious mind may release them, but your subconscious continues processing, connecting, making these insights part of you. You are not just learning about psychology. You are psychology. Every moment of your experience, every thought, every feeling, every behavior, every memory, every perception. All of it is psychological phenomena, the human mind knowing itself. And perhaps that's the deepest wonder of all. Through psychology, consciousness studies itself. The mind investigates its own nature. You, right now, are awareness becoming aware of awareness. Let that recognition rest gently within you. You are a miracle of evolution, a complex system of neurons and synapses creating the richness of human experience. You are capable of learning, growing, healing, connecting, creating, and finding meaning. Take a slow, deep breath now, feeling your chest rise and fall. And as you breathe out, release any remaining tension, any effort. Just be here, just be. If this journey has resonated with you, if you found value in these gentle explorations of the mind, you might consider returning again, listening once more, allowing the repetition to deepen your understanding. You might explore other topics in psychology, neuroscience, philosophy, continuing your learning, your growth, your self-discovery. And remember, you are worthy of compassion, understanding, and care. Your psychological well-being matters. If you struggle, help is available. If you flourish, you can share that flourishing with others. Psychology is not just academic knowledge but lived wisdom. Apply it with kindness to yourself, to those you love, to all beings you encounter. Use understanding to reduce suffering and increase well-being. Let knowledge become compassion. As this session comes to a close, let yourself rest fully now. If you're drifting toward sleep, let sleep come. If you're ready to wake, wake gently, carrying these insights with you. Either way, know that your mind has absorbed what it needed, and integration continues even now, even in silence, even in sleep. Thank you for taking this journey. Thank you for your curiosity, your openness, your commitment to understanding. May this knowledge serve you well. Breathe in peace. Breathe out gratitude. Breathe in wisdom. Breathe out love. Rest well, be well, grow well. And may you continue discovering the beauty and mystery of your own consciousness. This magnificent gift of being human for all your days.